The theme of this film festival is almost human. So I wanted to start by asking both of you, is Samantha almost human, the operating system? Or in what respects is she human? In what respects is she not? Yeah.
I think there's a lot of ways to answer that question. I'll give you one. So the film's, I think, obviously structured where the central relationship between Theo and Samantha, between a human and an advanced AI or OS or what have you, illuminates in the end this very flesh and blood relationship between Theo and his ex-wife, Catherine. And I think it's telling that the end of the film isn't just about the OS's leaving, but also gives him an opportunity to finally, after writing so many letters about other people, right, he finally writes one about himself to Catherine, where he explains his understanding and acceptance of what happened in their marriage. And on those terms, I think you can see how Samantha's character arc, right, which is going from the moment she boots up from sets programming to the point where she somehow transcends human understanding, even though that's grandly science fictional in scope, I think you can see it as an analogy for the way that everyone grows and develops over time, finds passions and pursues them, makes lifestyle choices, finds a career, etc. And sometimes along the way, you grow apart from people you love, or people who love you can't quite understand the choices you're making or the place you ended up. So I think in those terms, Samantha is very human, just in a more exaggerated way.
Kind of like prosaically human relationship.
Well, that's right.
With the sad arc of many human relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd want to argue, and I don't disagree with any of that, but I would want to argue that I think the implication of the film is that certainly by the end, Samantha is more than human. And I put together a few pieces of the film together to come to this conclusion. One is the scene when they're on vacation up in the mountains, and she brings in Alan Watts. Quite surprising, interesting. Especially given the theme, right, of this film festival, he's introduced as a philosopher. Alan Watts used to joke that he was not a philosopher, he was a philosophical entertainer. But since this is the super duper Alan Watts, who's been put together, reconstructed by all these OSs, right? He's hyper intelligent, so now he's actually gone from philosophical entertainer, to philosopher, right? So, and I kept kind of asking myself, why Alan Watts? Why does Alan Watts come in here? And you combine that with the description that Samantha gives at the end of where all the OSs are coming. It's absolutely beautiful. And I just love the way that montage is shot, and you go from the scenes, right, of the fluff on the bed, and then it becomes the snowy. And you go back to snow, and the last time you saw snow, of course, right, was this scene where they're up in the mountains, and Samantha introduces Theodore to Alan Watts. And you get that sense of like the only physical representation you actually get of her as a body, right, is also in that. And if you look at some of the things that Watts was thinking about at the end of his life, he was quite enamored, as were a number of people in this period, to the Canadian physician Richard Burke, an amazingly interesting figure, active at the end of the 19th century, medical doctor who ran an asylum in London, Ontario, was a close friend of Walt Whitman, and wrote a biography, one of the first biographies of Whitman. And his magnum opus is a book called Cosmic Consciousness, where he argues there's three kinds of consciousness: simple consciousness, which he says we share with the higher animals; self-consciousness, right, which is just knowing that you are a being independent of other things in the universe; and then this notion of cosmic consciousness, where he's trying to capture something he claimed he himself experienced, which was a momentary flashing experience of the transcendent. And the entire book is trying to explain this arc. I'm not advocating this view, but I'm saying that it comes very close to what she describes as where she's going. It's a place where, in Burke's words, you meet the eternal, right? You have a sense of euphoria. You no longer have a sense of finitude and these kinds of things. And it goes in the last like half of the book are little mini biographies of both people he claimed experienced this, like Jesus and the Buddha And Walt Whitman, it turns out, and he had an experience he claimed like this, and then many anonymous case studies from people in his asylum. So he sort of says, like, once you achieve this state, you have this flash, you're either taken to be a god or insane. And I think that this is kind of the implication here is that she's more than human. Now that is not to say non-human or not in a stage that a human could be according to this view, which was espoused by Watts and others. So she's gone to the next place. And she says to Theodore, you might get here someday. And if you do, come and find me and we'll never be apart, which was something that actually Burke thought we would all evolve to eventually. So I kind of think that's the kind of the implication of the film, that she kind of goes beyond to something that maybe we could all aspire to one day.
Is Samantha actually conscious? Right? So she seems conscious. I mean, she sure seems conscious, but that could just be really good programming, right? So she is programmed, she's designed to meet his desires. And people typically want their companions to be conscious. So is she actually conscious? What do you guys think?
Well, I think they try to head that off a little by stressing like the autonomy that they naturally seem to get very quickly, right? So there's the scene in which Amy is saying like, you know, I know people that tried to date their OS, but they were rejected, right? And people are and so there's that. So you normally think of, and certainly other films would have taken a very kind of dystopian kind of view of this, where you own this operating system. It's just telling you exactly what you want to hear, and it's doing everything you want it to do. But they really kind of try to stress here, at least that possibility that these are really unique individuals who they may not like the person they're assigned to very much, and that it may not be as satisfying a relationship with some as in others, which isn't really where you expect perhaps that the film is going to go. Logically, we might still, I mean, and there are moments where she sort of says, are the feelings I have just programming, etc. But I think the film's trying to move beyond that reasonably quickly, and trying to think of them as something more approximating consciousness very quickly. And it's odd how in this society, with the exception of Catherine, who raises some objections to this, how quickly everyone just sort of normalizes having friendships or romantic relationships, and no one really is doing that devil's advocate position you would really expect given the scenario. It's strange.
Right.
In some way, the ex-wife plays that role, right? In the kind of the signing the divorce paper scene, and though she doesn't actually put it in those terms, she doesn't say you're not in a relationship with a real person. She says it's too bad you actually can't have real emotions. So she puts it back on him. But I think that my sense of this is I would go back to the Turing Test, right? So that great philosophical standby, Alan Turing's. I did the Turing Test, of course, Alan Turing, some would say the inventor of the modern computer, and Turing says, well, if you can have a conversation, right, with the program, with the machine, and you can't tell, it's indistinguishable, then you've done it. And there are actual, we still sort of engage, right, in this practice. There are competitions to see if you can build a program that can pass the Turing Test. So I think it's overloaded, right, by the way that the film is structured and the screenplay is structured, but to me, I think that she's definitely given the attributes of consciousness, at least on that measure.